For the past 2 days, I've been thinking about something that was pretty damn interesting, and it just kind of made sense for me to make a video about it because I've got some beautiful footage to show you guys some interesting things that Jay and I had captured. Sitting in front of this church, and there's like music playing in there. It might be a cello, but I'm not sure. So, a brief summary. Stayed over at Jay's apartment with his girlfriend Echo, and yesterday we went to the Garden of Contemplation. And for the entire time that I was there, and for the entire journey on a bus, and I've been thinking about this idea of resurgence, so to speak. Because back in the 14th century, the idea or the concept of studia humanitatis, or this, this study of the humanities, that resurfaced near the 14th century, which directly impacted the rest of Renaissance history. And literature was directly impacted by these efforts to recover old texts, for example, the Quintilian ethical texts, for example. Old texts like Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey, Terence's comedies, Seneca's tragedies, all of these old texts throughout the 14th century, all the way up to like the 16th century, they're having this kind of like resurgence of, everything from the original Latin texts to the place scripts of certain plays. There was a real culture around Europe at the time that systematically recovered and systematically studied these source texts. And art was forever changed. And if you read some of the older literature, for example, prime example, Christopher Marlowe or his contemporary William Shakespeare, which, everyone knows Shakespeare. In these pieces of literature, there was always this, like this subtle nod to the Latin-based texts and to like the Greek texts. But this resurgence is what I've been thinking about actively recently because it's such a parallel to what's happening with this entire dark academia thing. The Renaissance was a while ago, right? People realized that it's important to go back to the older literary texts. And, for the past few hundred years, we've had a lot of amazing developments. We sent people into space, we developed all these crazy gadgets, and the internet became a thing. And of course, in those few hundred years, literature sort of had its own little accumulation of various works. But there was never a conscious awareness of like, we need to go back to the old stuff. To me, this entire obsession with dark academia, to me as an optimist, I think this is really kind of like a parallel to what happened during the Renaissance. What's entering the social discourse right now as a phenomena is that people are currently obsessed with the aesthetics of old stuff, but then, literature sort of like trickles in there, but right now it's mainly about the aesthetics. But I feel like if we give this thing a few decades, for example, for it to trickle out, because this idea of digging back into the older texts, because this is already a thing, this is just the surface of manifestation. This is just the beginning of everything. Right now it's all about the clothing, the dark sweater, big old dusty libraries, but over time, because these texts, for example, if you like Shakespeare, if you like Homer, if you like Charles Dickens, if you like some even older stuff, like if you really want to go back to the original sources, because this phenomena had already entered the public consciousness, over time, these texts will become more and more ubiquitous. You're going to see these small pockets of community. They're going to start talking about Byron. They're going to start talking about like how they loved Keats, right? Even though they might not have like a perfect understanding or perfect interpretation of those texts, nevertheless, it's still out there. More people are reading, and that's really good. It's kind of like that thing, like when you were younger, you maybe read like a Charles Dickens novel because your teacher forced you to read it, but like years later, when you go back to the novel again, you realize, holy shit, that was like one of the best books I've ever read. That's kind of what's happening right now with dark academia, but on a larger scale. It's attracting people to explore classical literature. But right now, because this is such a new phenomena, many people are not used to reading classic literature. They don't necessarily have the tools, so they come up with all sorts of misinterpretations. They come up with all sorts of silly readings. But if we give this thing time, if we let it bake, years down the track, these readers, new readers that are getting back into the classics, they'll realize that, holy crap, like, what I've read there might have just been the best thing that had ever happened to me. For me, that book was Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. And recently I started reading Oliver Twist again because I had this entire thing with Charles Dickens where I read Great Expectations and didn't really think twice about it, but it was not until recently had I realized that was one of the best novels I've ever read. After, a few years of letting it sink in, now it all kind of makes sense. Right now, you might be sitting there, you might be reading Hamlet or something, you might be reading Victor Hugo or something, and you're just kind of like, this is boring. Like, why am I even reading this thing? But if you give it a few years, it's gonna trickle into you like, you know, that river that's running beneath the bridge, that one day something's gonna surface, you're gonna realize, wow, that book just completely changed me. And that's how it is with most classics. So this entire dark academia thing right now is kind of like this obsession with aesthetics, but because it's an invitation for people to get into the classics, because it has such a grab in this highly visual culture. You know, we're very visual creatures right now with Instagram, with YouTube, with Facebook and everything. We're very visual creatures. So by capturing people's attention and through bringing people back to the classics, this is how we, you know, resurface these old but still important texts. This is a very friendly invitation for people to start reading these books. Of course, they're not going to understand it. Of course, these elitists, you know, at universities are going to scream at us for misreading everything. But if we just take our time, if we just give it a benefit of the doubt, it is going to trickle into you, and you will realize years down the track that Hamlet might have been your favorite play of all time. That, like, you know, Charles Dickens might have changed your entire life. So that's what I've been thinking about recently. Expect future videos to be kind of like this video diary slash just my personal rambles, and expect more vlogs because there are a lot of things that are happening right now. I'll probably keep that for another video, but there's been some recent really major developments happening in my own life that I really want to share with you guys in the form of vlogs. Anyway, that's all I have for today's video. If you liked the video, be sure to leave me a like, and I will see you in the next one.